If you work just like he does, but after work your day is only beginning. You cook, clean, take care of the kids, hold the household together and keep everything in mind, while he can simply switch off, watch football, have a beer, meet friends, or lie on the couch. This video is for you. Not because he's a bad person, and not because you want too much, but because in this relationship, responsibility is distributed unevenly. And if you're used to thinking that everything can be solved through conversation, patience, or by just enduring a little longer, it's important to watch this video to the end, because the real way out begins in a completely different place than where most women are looking for it. You work. You have your own job, your own tasks, responsibilities, deadlines. You wake up in the morning and you're already switched on. Your mind starts calculating, planning, keeping everything under control. You do what needs to be done. You cope. But there's something that rarely gets said out loud. When your workday ends, it doesn't really end. You come home and instead of a pause, the next part of the day begins. Not a different life, but a continuation of the same one. You check what food is available. You think about what needs to be cooked. What needs to be bought tomorrow. What didn't get done today. What can't be forgotten. Even if you're physically sitting down, inside you're still working. You might open your laptop, check emails, finish tasks. You might just sit with your phone, but that's not rest. It's an attempt to keep up with everything at once. You're constantly in holding things together mode. And the hardest part is that this happens even when no one is around. Even when the room is quiet. Even when the kids are asleep. Even when, technically, nothing is happening. Your mind still doesn't switch off. You think about tomorrow. About money. About the home. About how everything is supposed to function. And gradually you start getting tired, not from the number of tasks, but from the fact that there is no moment where you're allowed to stop being responsible. You don't feel completion. You don't feel that a day is ever truly done. You just move from one state of tension into another. And here it's important to say one thing very clearly. This is not because you don't know how to rest. Not because you're making things harder for yourself. And not because you're overly anxious. It's because you're living in a system where responsibility has no pause. You're always on. Always inside the process. Always one step ahead. And the longer you live like this, the more your sense of self begins to fade. You may catch yourself noticing that. It's harder to feel joy. You get irritated more often. You want to talk less. You crave silence, but silence doesn't bring relief. Because the problem isn't noise. It's that inside you never stop. You're not just carrying tasks. You're carrying the entire structure of life. And at this point, a very dangerous feeling appears. That if you stop, everything will fall apart. The home. The rhythm. The stability. This is exactly where the moment begins. When a woman stops being just tired and becomes overloaded, a state where you seem to be coping, but inside everything feels heavier and heavier. And if, listening to this now, you catch yourself thinking, I don't even remember the last time I truly rested, that's an important signal. Because this isn't about tiredness. It's about a life without pause. And next we'll talk about why, in a system like this, conversations with a partner so often don't work. And why you end up in a position where more is resting on you than ever should. At some point you start talking. Not immediately. Not harshly. Not with a fight. First, carefully. You explain that you're tired. That it's hard for you. That you need help. You choose your words. Try not to accuse. You speak calmly like an adult. And he seems to listen. He nods. Says he understands. Sometimes he even promises to help more. And for a moment it feels like the conversation worked. But a day passes. Then a week. And everything falls back into place. You're doing more again. You're adjusting again. You're closing the gaps that no one else will handle. And at some point you start thinking that the problem is you. Maybe you explain poorly. Maybe you don't ask clearly enough. Maybe you're too soft. Or on the contrary, too sharp. You start searching for the right words. But the truth is, it's not about the words. The problem is that conversations don't change the system you're living in. As long as you continue carrying everything yourself, as long as the house functions, the kids are fed, life keeps going, The system has no reason to change. Even if he genuinely doesn't mind helping, even if he doesn't see himself as a bad partner, he's living inside a structure where responsibility has already been distributed. You are the one who holds things together. He is the one who can relax. And every conversation happens inside this same structure. You talk, and then you still do it yourself. You explain, and then you adjust again. You get angry, and then you're the one who smooths over the conflict, because it's calmer that way. And gradually your words lose their weight. Not because he doesn't respect you, but because actions speak louder than words. Through your behavior, not your speech, you show that you'll manage, that you'll endure, that you'll take on a little more. And this is a very painful realization, because you didn't want to live like this. You didn't plan to be the only support. You didn't agree to the role of the one who carries everything. But step by step, you stepped into it. And every time a conversation doesn't change reality, even more exhaustion builds inside. You start feeling invisible, as if your words exist, but you yourself don't. And here it's important to understand one thing. This isn't because you chose the wrong man. And not because you can't express your feelings properly. It's because you're trying to solve a structural problem with conversation. And structures don't change through words. They only change when you stop compensating for what should never rest on you alone. And as long as you keep stepping in, smoothing things over, covering the gaps, rescuing, the conversations will repeat, but the result won't. And at this point, many women reach their limit. They either explode, or shut down, or begin living in a state of quiet burnout. And next we'll talk about what is actually happening to you inside this state, and why you start losing yourself, even when from the outside everything looks fine. This doesn't happen suddenly, not in one day, not after one conversation. You don't wake up one morning thinking, I'm not myself anymore. Everything happens more quietly. At first you're just tired. Then you start getting irritated more often. Then you catch yourself wanting less and less. To talk, to explain, to share. It's like you're saving energy, because there's already so little of it. You still do what needs to be done. The house functions. Life goes on. From the outside, everything looks normal. But inside, something is slowly wearing away. You feel less joy. You want closeness less. You want to be in connection less. Not because there's something wrong with you, but because you no longer have the resource to stay alive inside. You live in a constant mode of functionality. You think not about what you want, but about what still needs to be done. Not about how you feel, but about how to keep everything from falling apart. And at some point you start noticing something strange. You're physically close to a man. You live in the same house. You sleep in the same bed. But you feel alone. Not because he left, but because you've been without support for a long time. You stop feeling a shoulder next to you. You stop feeling that you can relax. You stop feeling that someone else is holding part of life with you. And then you start holding even more. You become more collected, more rigid, more controlling. You allow yourself less weakness, because you know, if you fall, no one will catch you. And this changes you from the inside. You may notice that it's hard to be soft. It's hard to trust. It's hard to ask. It's hard to relax even on a day off, because inside there's constant tension. If I don't keep track, something will go wrong. And the longer you live in this state, the further you move away from yourself. You start forgetting what you enjoy, what fills you, what makes you feel alive. You stop being a woman and become a role, the role of the strong one, the reliable one, the one others can lean on. From the outside, this may look like a strength, but inside it very often feels like emptiness, because in these relationships, you no longer feel chosen. You feel needed, and being needed is not the same as closeness. When someone loves you, they want to be with you. When someone uses you as support, they lean on you but don't stand beside you. And this is a very painful place, because you can't just stop doing everything. You can't just let go. You're too deeply inside this system. And this is where many women begin to think that something is wrong with them, that they've become cold, harsh, impossible. But the truth is, You've simply lived without support for too long. And next we'll talk about where the real turning point begins. Not a scandal, not an ultimatum, but the moment when you stop disappearing in these relationships. Up to this point, you've been constantly trying to fix something, to understand, to explain, to adjust yourself. You search for the right words, the right tone, the right moment. You thought, if I speak more calmly, he'll hear me. If I speak more firmly, he'll understand. If I endure a little longer, something will change. But the turning point doesn't start there. It doesn't start with a new conversation, not with another attempt to explain, not even with a conflict. The real turning point begins at the moment when you ask yourself a question, not about him, but about yourself. Not why does he behave this way, but why am I living as if it's my responsibility to carry everything? This is a very quiet moment. On the outside, nothing may be happening at all. No scenes, no decisions, no loud words. But inside, something starts to shift. You suddenly realize that you're not just tired. You've been constantly sacrificing yourself. So the system keeps working. You didn't consciously choose this. You simply, step by step, took on what needed to be done. You picked things up. You covered gaps. You solved problems. Not because you wanted control, but because you wanted order, stability, calm. And this is where the hardest thought appears. The one that's difficult to accept. As long as you live for two, he doesn't need to become a second adult. Not because he's bad, but because the system already works. The house doesn't fall apart. Daily life is handled. The children are taken care of. Life goes on. The price of this is you. And this realization is deeply uncomfortable because it's not about blame. It's about responsibility. Not his but yours for your own life. The turning point doesn't happen when you decide to do something about him. It happens when you stop automatically compensating for everything that should not rest on you alone. Not abruptly, not demonstratively, not out of anger, but out of clarity. You begin to notice where you're doing too much, where you're taking on more than you can carry, where you agree not because you want to, but because otherwise no one will do it. And this is very important. This is not about punishment and not about manipulation. This is about restoring boundaries. Boundaries not as threats, but as an honest contact with reality. When you stop covering everything for two, reality begins to show itself. Either a second adult appears beside you, or it becomes clear that he isn't there. And that's frightening, because uncertainty is scarier than familiar exhaustion. But this is exactly where the most important thing happens. You stop disappearing. You no longer live as if your value is only in how much you can endure. You begin returning to yourself, to your sensations, to your body, to your fatigue. And this doesn't make you selfish. It makes you alive. Because relationships that exist only through the effort of one person are not partnership. And in the next part, we'll talk about what actually starts to change when you take a different position, calmly without pressure, but for real. When you stop automatically carrying everything on yourself, life doesn't suddenly become easier. And it's important to say this honestly. The first changes are not about relief. They're about tension. Because the system you lived in for a long time starts to lose its support. Before everything was clear, you knew that if you didn't do something, it simply wouldn't get done. Now you begin to stop. Not demonstratively, not defiantly, but calmly. You no longer rush to fix everything first. You don't automatically pick things up. You don't silently compensate. And this feels very unfamiliar. Pauses appear. Awkwardness appears. A sense of uncertainty appears. And this is exactly where reality shows itself. Because when you stop living for two, life begins to reveal who is actually next to you. There are two possible scenarios. The first, the man begins to notice the emptiness that used to be filled by you. First, he may get irritated. He may not understand what's happening. He may feel the loss of familiar comfort. But if he has the capacity to be an adult, he gradually starts to step in. Not because you forced him, but because now he has to occupy the space. that was previously covered by your effort. And this doesn't always look smooth. Sometimes it's awkward. Sometimes there are mistakes. But movement appears. The second scenario, and it's just as important to see it. If there is no second adult next to you, if the man is used to living in a system where the structure is always held for him, he may simply not step into that space. And then what becomes visible is what your exhaustion had been hiding all along. This is very painful because you realize that all this time you weren't holding a partnership, you were holding emptiness. But here is the key point. Clarity is not destruction. Clarity is the end of illusion. An illusion always takes more strength than reality. When you stop carrying everything alone, you begin for the first time to see clearly what you can actually lean on and what you can't. And this gives you choice. Before you didn't have it because you were constantly busy surviving. Now space appears. You begin to feel different. Not instantly happy, but more alive. You no longer dissolve completely into functions. You begin to return to yourself, to your sensations, to your boundaries, to your body. You may feel fear, because the source of support is shifting, but alongside the fear, strength appears, because you are no longer living in the mode of, I must endure. You are living in the mode of, I have the right not to carry everything alone. And no matter what happens next, you no longer lose yourself. This is the place where real change begins, not necessarily in the relationship, but in you. And in the final part, we'll talk about what's important to hold on to right now, so you don't slip back into the old pattern, even if everything around you tries to pull you back into the familiar role. When you reach this point, a strange feeling appears. On one hand, you see more than before. You understand where you were living not from choice, but from necessity. On the other hand, anxiety may arise, because the old pattern, no matter how heavy it was familiar. You knew how to survive in it. You knew how to keep everything under control. You knew what to do if it became hard again. Just take on a little more. And that's exactly why it's so important. Not to make the most common move. Not to go back. Not because someone will force you, but because the habit of living for two is very quiet and very strong. It comes back through thoughts like, fine, I'll just do it myself, it's faster. It's easier not to bring it up. Now is not the right time. We'll deal with it later somehow. Each time it sounds reasonable. Each time it feels temporary. But it's precisely these laters that build a life where you disappear again. So here it's important to hold on to one simple thing. You are not required to be strong for a relationship to exist. If a relationship only survives because you keep enduring, that's not closeness. That's survival. And this is not an accusation. It's a fact. You don't have to decide for two. You don't have to anticipate everything. You don't have to fix everything in advance. You have the right to pause, to uncertainty, to not knowing exactly how everything will turn out. Because clarity is not about having answers. Clarity is about no longer lying to yourself. You stop saying I'm fine when you're not. You stop calling exhaustion a personality trait. You stop calling loneliness just a phase. You begin to name things as they are. And that doesn't make you cold. It makes you honest. Maybe the person next to you will be able to grow in this reality. Maybe not. But that's no longer the main question. The main question is this. Do you stop living as if your role in this relationship is to be the support instead of a human being? You don't have to make decisions right now. You don't have to destroy anything. You don't have to take drastic steps. Sometimes the strongest step is to stop doing what's unnecessary, to stop caring what was never meant to be yours alone, to stop proving your worth through exhaustion. You don't have to be indispensable to be loved. And if after this video you feel not inspiration, but a calm sense of clarity, that's a good sign, because real change doesn't begin with emotion. It begins the moment you are no longer willing to lose yourself, just so everything looks normal. And if you're here right now, that moment has already arrived.